Okay. Hello and welcome. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Learning Lunch featuring local reporter and author Ben Rains. Before we begin, I do have a few announcements to make. We are pleased to present our latest in-house exhibition, A History of Mobile in 22 Objects. 22 unexpected and compelling objects weave together over 300 years of Mobile history from the pre-colonial era to the 21st century port. With contributions from Mobile's leading historians, professors, and museum curators, you are sure to discover both new and familiar stories in this landmark exhibition. The museum is offering, to go along with this exhibition, exclusive director's tours of the exhibition. Meg McCrummon-Fowler, our director, will discuss the objects in further detail and guide you through an approximately 45-minute tour of the exhibit. The tours are available on Monday, January 18th at 10:30 a.m., Thursday, January 21st at 5:30 p.m., and on Saturday, January 30th at 10:30 a.m. The tours are limited to 10 people and you must sign up in advance. It will be included as part of general admission to the museum, and as always, members are free. An exciting blockbuster exhibition called Egyptian Mummies, An Eternal Life is coming to the museum and opens on February 26th. With over 100 ancient artifacts, including mummies, painted sarcophagi, funeral trousseau, and votive objects, this exhibition evokes the mythical and mysterious landscape of the tombs and pyramids of ancient Egypt. Memberships to the History Museum are a great way to support the museum and get the most out of what the museum has to offer. Memberships provide free admission for a year and invitations to members-only special events. For more information, please check the museum website. Next Wednesday, we have a special learning lunch on January 20th at noon. It will feature former NASA astronaut Dr. Catherine Sullivan. In this presentation, the first American woman to walk in space will discuss her work as an astronaut and her experience as part of the team that launched, rescued, repaired, and maintained the Hubble Space Telescope, as detailed in her book, Handprints on Hubble, An Astronaut's Story of Invention. Now, if you have questions during this program, write them in the Zoom chat box, or if you're on Facebook, in the comment box, and we'll have time for Mr. Rains to answer the questions at the end. It is now my privilege to introduce Mr. Ben Rains. He has won more than 24 awards for his coverage of environmental issues and natural wonders in Alabama and on the Gulf Coast, and has co-authored several peer-reviewed papers published in scientific journals. Rains, a filmmaker, aquatic explorer, and discoverer of the wreck of the Clotilda, the last ship to bring enslaved Africans to the United States, wrote and produced the documentary America's Amazon, which has aired on PBS stations around the country. He wrote and directed The Underwater Forest, an award-winning film about the exploration of a 70,000-year-old cypress forest found off the Alabama coast. Ben Rains is a licensed charter captain who leads adventure tours in the Mobile-Tensaw Delta and to Alabama's Barrier Islands. Today, he's going to discuss his book, Saving America's Amazon, and the importance of the Alabama River System. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ben Rains to the History Museum of Mobile. And at this time, we'll turn it over to him.
Well, hello. I realized I had a bunch of the book behind me in these boxes, so I thought I'd get one out. This is the book, if you haven't seen it yet. It has been hard to get for some reason. Amazon sold out right away, which is a good thing in a lot of measures, but there is a little frustrating if you're trying to sell books because you want them to be able to be bought. So Amazon is now selling them again. The second printing is en route from California to Tennessee to the Amazon Fulfillment Center. So if you haven't gotten your book yet, you should get it soon, or you can order them now. You can also order them from me through Facebook. Just send me a message or an email, and I'll have my email on the screen at the end of this, and I can send you a signed copy. So without further ado, I'm going to show you a lot of pictures. Most of the pictures are actually from the book, and I'm going to sort of give you the reason I wrote the book and what I've learned about Alabama and the challenges facing Alabama from 20 years covering it from an environmental perspective. and meeting this new place that was not known to me, though I am an Alabama native. And I think a lot of people are having that experience right now that I've had, realizing that we were never, we didn't get to know all of Alabama that we should have. And it has been sort of hidden from the public for decades. So I am going to, somebody's sharing a screen that wasn't me. I'm about to share my screen, but I think we're looking at Mary Lucas's screen, which I'm not sure is what we want to be doing. All right, there we go. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll start the show. And here we go, and play it. All right. So Saving America's Amazon, I have gotten some flack from folks saying that the Americas already have an Amazon in South America. And I would counter that the Delta and the Alabama River system needed some good publicity. E.O. Wilson, when I made my film, America's Amazon, said, well, you know, there's another Amazon. And then after the film came out, he called me up and he said, I want to tell you, I was upset about America's Amazon at first, but now I realize it's brilliant. It's exactly what we needed. People are all talking about it now because they have a catchy name they can stick to. So here's the cover of the book, which I showed you a second ago. This is in the Mobile-Tensaw Delta. You're looking at an egret in front of a stand of lotus flowers. And now we are into our show. Here we're looking at a beautiful sulfur butterfly, one of our native butterflies, hanging off a Chinese princess tree, or I'm sorry, a Chinese plum tree. Here we are looking at a bumblebee with a Chinese princess tree, which is a beautiful tree, grows 60 to 100 feet tall and is covered in the spring with these beautiful white flowers. You see them all over the state now. Anybody out there know what this beautiful flower is? That's right, it is kudzu. And then there is this. This is a beautiful wisteria. This is actually not our native wisteria. This is a Japanese wisteria, but you see it all over Alabama. This is our native wisteria, which you will almost never see. It is every bit as beautiful as the foreign invader, but has been totally wiped out in most of our public places. You can find it in the swamp. That's where this one is. The way to tell the difference, our native wisteria, when it blooms, the leaves are already out. You can see the leaves in this picture. This spring, starting February, March, when all the wisteria comes out, look around you. You will see that almost all the wisteria you see is blooming without leaves, which means it's the foreign wisteria. And then this is our state flower, a camellia, which is native to China, Korea, and Japan. Now, I would argue that we have plenty of beautiful flowers here in Alabama. We are home to more species of plants and animals than any other state per square mile, almost twice as many. And this flower really gets at my whole point. Everything we've looked at in all those images, those are all invasive plants, non-native plants. And that's kind of what we often celebrate here in Alabama, are things that are not Alabama. This was really brought home to me with this award. This was an award given to the Weeks Bay Foundation, which I used to run, which is an environmental group that buys land. Now it's called the South Alabama Land Trust, or SALT, but it was the Weeks Bay Foundation. This award was given by the Alabama Wildlife Federation and the governor. This is the Governor's Conservation Achievement Award. And this award in Alabama is of a mountain goat. Now, mountain goats only live in those red areas on this map of the United States. You can see that's a long way from Alabama. Why on earth is the Alabama Wildlife Federation and the governor of Alabama giving out an award with a mountain goat? And it gets at what's wrong in Alabama. We don't treasure what's all around us. Here you can see a bobcat up in the Delta. That would be a great animal to have on one of these statues. Or this beautiful alligator up in the Delta. You know, if you want something even more threatening than a bobcat, we have these giant swamp cane cutter rabbits. They would be great on the statue. This one is actually sitting on a log during the floods in the Delta. Can't go anywhere. We have beautiful grasshoppers that would be better than having a mountain goat on our state award. This is a blue-eyed, a handsome blue-eyed meadow katydid. That's its full common name. But this is Alabama to the public and to most people in Alabama. It is cotton fields, steel mills, and civil rights protests. But those are the things we've done to Alabama. Those are the things we've done in Alabama. They're not what Alabama is. But that's Alabama in the mind of the nation at large, and even of the people who live here. Instead, Alabama is this incredible wild place. What you're looking at here is the Mobile-Tensaw Delta in an infrared image. And this is one of the largest wetland complexes in the United States, meaning an area of contiguous wetlands you can find anywhere in the country, this massive river delta. This is the third biggest river delta in the country. It sits right here on top of Mobile, which is all that red at the bottom of the screen. And what I love about seeing this infrared image, where you see green, blue, and purple, you are seeing nature. And where you see red, you're seeing humanity. Look at that massive amount of totally uninhabited wilderness in the center of this image there. It is one of the most diverse places in America, and it is the culmination of our whole river system that starts up in North Alabama and flows all the way down here. It is our delta. This is a shot of the irises in the delta, which bloom in March and April. And you can, if you can't really tell in this picture, but the irises stretch out across 30 acres in this area. This is on Little Batty in the center of the delta. When people see irises, they often think of New Orleans, the fleur-de-lis, which is an iris, but it's actually an Alabama iris. When French Louisiana adopted the iris as a symbol, it was because they recognized irises from France. Joan of Arc marched with an iris on her battle flag, but Mobile was the capital of French Louisiana. They were actually looking at irises growing in Alabama. That's an Alabama iris on the New Orleans city symbol and the Louisiana flag. So just a little food for thought, but they're here in our delta, these spectacular flowers. Here is a hummingbird nectaring at one of the iris up in the delta. And then here we're seeing the lotus. The iris would be a great candidate for a state flower, as would the lotus. You begin to wonder how we ended up with a camellia as our state flower when we are home to such an array of beautiful flowers. But it's because we don't understand what is here. Alabama has a long history of being exploited, and usually by people from other places, be that other countries or other states. The history of Alabama is all about taking, people coming here to take things from the environment. One of the first things they took were the trees. This is the last giant cypress in the Mobile-Tensaw Delta that I know of. It is about 32 feet around. That's a normal size human there standing in front of it. These trees are the size of redwoods, but they were all cut down, and they were cut down beginning in the 1800s and floated out, the classic logging thing you see. And then ultimately up into the 80s, they were being cut by helicopter and pulled out that way. But we lost the giant trees that were here in Alabama before we were here. One of the things that happened when we explored the underwater forest, this ancient cypress forest that's about 10 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, was we kept seeing these giant tree stumps. Well, that forest, that was the delta. That was the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, back 75,000 years ago. And those trees you see there, the stumps you see, which are 10 feet across, are the stumps from a forest before people were here cutting the trees down. So, we can almost not even imagine what Alabama was before we were here, because these trees, Alabama has been cut over probably 3 times, the whole state. So we're only beginning to grasp what all is here. Now this is a ruby-throated hummingbird down on Dauphin Island, or Fort Morgan rather. I'm going to show you a couple of birds real quick. This is an indigo bunting. This whole area is this incredibly important migration corridor for birds coming through from South America. And they arrive here, these are more of the buntings, after crossing the Gulf of Mexico in this epic 24-hour flight. And they come into Alabama because of this river system. They can go all the way up the river system as a corridor where they can find food and shelter to spread out into all of North America. We have about 280 bird species that come through Alabama annually this way, just further adding to our diversity. This picture I like. This is on the causeway. You always hear about Montana and Wyoming as big sky country. I would argue that Alabama is big sky country. We don't have all the birds, or the mountains rather, in the way. We just have these wide open vistas. So the whole river system comes down here to the bay and begins this area called the Fertile Fisheries Crescent. And so all of the energy in all of the rivers, all that biological energy for everything growing and dying and then flowing downstream comes into Mobile Bay, creating one of the richest marine ecosystems in the world. The area that begins at the mouth of Mobile Bay and spreads to Louisiana to the mouth of the Mississippi River is called the Fertile Fisheries Crescent. And it's called that by scientists because it is one of the most biologically rich marine ecosystems on the planet. And that's in the Gulf of Mexico, which is already one of the richest marine ecosystems on the planet. But when we go to the beach, we just see sand and maybe some little silvery fish flitting around. We don't really appreciate what's here. This picture is on the rocks down at around Dauphin Island. These are tidewater silversides swimming there. This is a view you would not expect if you were standing at Dauphin Island looking out at the Gulf. Yet it's here. These are larval shrimp that were caught along the causeway. They are part of this annual cycle of all these billions of sea creatures that come into Mobile Bay and spread into the Mobile-Tensaw Delta every year. These shrimp were captured in about February or March. And by summertime, by June, they'll be 3 inches long and they'll be the shrimp you're eating for dinner. Just incredible. These are baby speckled trout that are about 1 inch long that eat those tiny shrimp. And these are anchovies. This is at Perdido Pass. The rocks there, if you've never snorkeled along them, is just spectacular. But you would not think this was a view you would see in Alabama, putting a mask on and going underwater. This is a tiny seahorse. This is an adult seahorse. It is a dwarf or pygmy seahorse. This was caught right along the Alabama-Florida border. If you can imagine, these seahorses mate for life and in pairs. And so when I caught this one, it was actually with its mate. They had their tails wrapped together. It just always stuns me to look at this tiny, tiny seahorse and imagine its whole life is spent in a grass bed where it's got to find another creature 1 inch long and they try and stay together for their whole lives. This is actually, incidentally, a pregnant male. You can tell his belly's sticking out. In seahorses and some of the pipefish, it's actually the males that give birth, which is fascinating. This is a shrimp with a bunch of eggs caught in Weeks Bay. And these are mangrove snapper. These were caught in Grand Bay. The one on the bottom is about 2 weeks old. The one on the top is about 3 weeks old. And what I'm getting at with all these baby pictures is talking about the nursery area of our coastal ecosystems. That this is the engine that feeds the Gulf of Mexico. This is a Molly Miller blenny on a platform just outside the mouth of Mobile Bay. Little fish, they live in barnacles, really cute. So now we're back on land. We were looking at where all the rivers flow down to. This is where the flow begins. It's in these pitcher plant bogs. We have this incredibly rare suite of habitats in Alabama, and actually kind of one of the largest arrays of these carnivorous plants. All those tall plants you see, those are pitcher plants. They're carnivorous. It's a big flute. The leaf is a big flute that can hold water, and they actually sucker bugs to come down in there where they die. We have 9 species of pitcher plants in Alabama, which is more than you can find in a geographic area this size just about anywhere in the world. Incidentally, in this picture, if you look over on the left, you see all those pink flowers. Those are one of our orchid species. Here's a praying mantis on a pitcher. You see these pitchers out below you. This is along Fish River. Imagine every one of these is an open mouth eating insects. And this is, if you cut a pitcher open, look at all the love bugs in there that are in the process of being digested. You can see a big grub in there. There's some animals that actually there's a ladybug down toward the bottom that actually lay their eggs inside pitcher plants. You can see a big beetle right below my thumb there. These plants are actually eating meat. It's a fascinating thing. This is a sundew. This is another one of our carnivorous plants. Those little globules are this sticky dew that bugs as big as dragonflies can get captured in and can't get away. Even birds, small birds, they get totally ensnared in the dew and basically are stuck there struggling until they expire, they die. And then as their bodies decompose, they nourish the plant. Here is a crane fly stuck in a sundew. And you can see the little glistening drops are all over him. He was still alive at this point, poor little guy. Here's a dragonfly that was killed in a sundew, and you can see ants crawling around on it, chewing on its carcass now that it's dead. And then this is another incredibly cool animal. This is a green lynx spider in a pitcher plant bog. These pitcher plant bogs are among the rarest places on Earth. They are home to so many species you can't find anywhere else, but they're also home to more species in a small area than you can find almost anywhere in the world. In the 1960s, an Auburn professor did a count in 1 square meter, square yard of a pitcher plant, of an Alabama Baldwin County pitcher plant bog. He counted, I believe, 68 species of flowering plants in that bog. That was the highest total anywhere on Earth at the time. More species of flowering plants were found in 1 square yard in Alabama than had been found anywhere else on Earth. Now there's a higher total, there's several higher totals now that have come around and been discovered in the last 20 years or so, one in Romania, which is in a cow pasture. But I believe if we go back and look in Alabama's pitcher plant bogs, we can probably discover that there are more species per square yard here than anywhere else in the world. It's just nobody's been looking for 50 years as these bogs have been getting destroyed. Now, this green lynx spider makes its living on these flowering plants, hunting bees that come in to pollinate them. And it pounces on them and injects a poison, killing them, paralyzing them almost instantly. These green spiders are as big as a banana spider. They're about 4 inches across from leg tip to leg tip. And if you get up close to one, it can actually spit a venom in your eye that can temporarily blind you. Really cool. This is a hummingbird hawk moth. It is nectaring at a liatris. This is a moth that is native here that looks like a hummingbird and flies like a hummingbird, but it's actually a moth. This is Gandalf. He is looming over a white fringed orchid. And this man is actually named Steve Heath. He is a former chief marine biologist for the state of Alabama. In his retirement, he's become part of a group I loosely call the Bog Men, although they now have women members, so we'll have to give them a new name, the Bog People, who go around and try and help protect our pitcher plant bogs. This orchid is not known to grow anywhere else in Alabama. It is known only from a very few places on Earth, including this little 3-acre pitcher plant bog along Fish River. Interesting history for that bog. It was a grown-up privet-infested thicket, and the owner decided to clear it off because he wanted to build a house there. Well, the neighbors got mad because they didn't want a house next door to them, but because they also knew it was a wetland. So they called the Corps of Engineers. Steve here in the picture was one of the people who came out. And the Corps made the landowner quit clearing this area. He cleared off about 3 acres. While they were fighting in court over the next several months, this bog appeared in this cleared off field. Suddenly pitcher plants came up everywhere. And then a bunch of these white fringed orchids came up everywhere, unknown in the state. This place had been grown up for 40, 50 years. But as soon as the sunlight got in there, when they cleared it off, suddenly all these native wildflowers popped up, these pitcher plant bog flowers. The first year that they popped up, there were about 20 of these orchids. The next year, there were about 40. 5 years later, there were about 400. This last count that was just completed this fall, in August when they bloom, there were about 1,700 of these orchids in this little 3-acre area. Really shows the persistence of these plants and things, that if we open back up to them, they will come rushing back into these habitats. This is another one of our orchids. We have 54 species of orchids. Just stunning, the amount of diversity here in Alabama. This is another little grass pink orchid, and that's a tiny frog about to jump onto it. This is a snake mouth orchid, and these things just grow in these fields all over Alabama. This is a green fly orchid. It's an arboreal species. It grows up in the top of live oak trees along the edges of the delta. Imagine 54 species of orchid, and they're just beautiful. They're exquisite. This is the orange fringed orchid. You never would have thought, perhaps, I never imagined that Alabama had 54 species of orchids. We hear about Oregon, it calls itself the Trillium state because it has 3 species of trillium. Alabama has 22. The diversity here is just staggering when you compare it to other places. This is a picture in an area called the Red Hills. For the last century, people have thought the Great Smoky Mountain National Park was the center of oak diversity, the center of diversity for oak trees in the world. Because in the park boundaries, which encompass several 100,000 acres, there are 15 species of oak. 2 years ago, a scientific paper was published. They found 20 species of oak tree on a single hillside in the Red Hills of Alabama, which is up around Monroeville. That area is now considered the global center of diversity for oak trees. And it was totally unknown until a few years ago. Here's another plant. This is the Red Hills azalea. It is native only to the Red Hills. Here's another one of our native azaleas. These would be great state flowers instead of the camellia. This is the Itasca lily, another potential. This is the big leaf magnolia. I mean, a flower the size of a briefcase. These would all be great state flowers. This is mountain laurel. And then this is this little salamander that lives only in the Red Hills. And it gets at all this diversity in Alabama because this salamander lives in a little band about 5 miles wide and 30 miles long and nowhere else on Earth. It is about a foot long. It wasn't even discovered until the mid-70s. What's important about this salamander is it branched off from all other modern salamanders perhaps 50 million years ago. All the other salamanders are much more closely related and branched off much more recently. The reason this guy is still here is because it's never died. Conditions in that little band in the Red Hills have stayed nice for the salamander for eons, for millennia. Even when the rest of the world was in this massive ice age, Alabama didn't freeze. And that's the key right there. That's why we have so many kinds of creatures and plants here. They didn't freeze during the ice ages. When I talk about the diversity here, it's pretty stunning. But when you really look at the aquatic diversity, it is world class. This is a darter. We have 54, I believe, species of darters in Alabama. We have 450 species of fish. Now, to put that in perspective, the state of California, which is 3 times larger than Alabama, has 110 native species of fish. We have 450. The 11 states that drain into the Colorado River Basin have 26 species of fish. We have 450. This diversity includes salamanders, snails. We are global leaders. Mussels, there are more mussels in Alabama than you can find in a geographic area that size anywhere else on Earth. Turtles are even more singular. The Mobile-Tensaw Delta has more species of turtles than any other river delta on Earth. I mean, this is staggering. Now, these are some more darters. I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures. They have wonderful names like the holiday darter, the lipstick darter, the turquoise darter, the Johnny darter. They're just beautiful. And these little guys are all 2 or 3 inches long. Just spectacular diversity of color and everything. And it's all about having survived for so many eons. I mean, look at these beautiful, beautiful little fish. Now, this is a little shiner. This is a beautiful rainbow shiner. When you see them, all these fish here, I caught in one little creek on 225. And this is a chub. This is a long-ear sunfish. This is the rainbow shiner. Look at that thing. It's about 2 inches, 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, and just neon. When you see them in the water, they glitter like turquoise jewels flitting over the bottom. Just incredible. These are the fish we should have had in our aquariums all our lives. We're importing these fish from South America, but I put one of these up against a neon tetra any day. It's just spectacular. This is a blue nose shiner found only in Baldwin County, Alabama. And then this is a rusty gravedigger. This is a little crawfish that I found. It was thought to be extinct. Now, I was going to do a story about what you could eat in the Delta, particularly crawfish species, and I wanted to know what I might catch. So I started looking them up, and of course the swamp devil, the red swamp devil, is the one we eat. That's what you eat in restaurants and stuff, is all over in the Delta. So that was one I would, but then I saw in the listing, there was this species that had only been caught once and never seen again. Now, Alabama has more species of crawfish than any other state. Contest is not close. Alabama has 97 species of crawfish. The state of California has 9. The state of Washington has 1. All of Europe has 4 species. But here in Alabama, we have 97 species. When I started writing this book, we only had 84 species. New species are being discovered constantly. But this species, it was only caught the one time. It was caught in Doleave Creek, which, if you're familiar with Baldwin County, is right next to it's where the city sewer system empties into. And it's trapped between the interstate and a Home Depot, the little creek where this guy was caught. So I spent 3 weeks trying to catch one. I finally caught one. it was confirmed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The crawfish scientists writing the book, Crawfishes of Alabama or Crayfishes of Alabama, were so excited, they flew down so I could take them there. We caught 7 more that first day. So this is the only place on earth this guy has ever been found, is here next to the sewer plant and the interstate and the Home Depot. So with those scientists, we start searching other creeks moving down Mobile Bay. We found them all the way down Mobile Bay. We found them all over Baldwin County. We found them in Florida. They'd been here all along, but nobody had ever looked for them. And that is the situation for so many of our rare creatures. I've talked about how rare these things are and how many Alabama has. We are at the top of the aquatic diversity lists, but we're at the top of another list. We are at the top of extinctions. More than half of all extinctions in the continental US have happened in Alabama since the 1800s. Think about that, more than half. Alabama has 90 known extinctions, another 100 expected extinctions, and then several hundred more species that need to be on the endangered species list. You take Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, and Louisiana and put them all together, and Alabama has more extinctions. I mean, this is a crisis. We cannot go on being first in all these categories and first in extinctions. You cannot wear both those crowns. One will catch up with the other. This is a rusty gravedigger crawfish hole in the Delta. I put it in here to give you, that little, this is not a rusty gravedigger, this is the red swamp devil. The rusty gravedigger crawfish is about 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, full grown. The red swamp devil is 13 inches long. Imagine that. We have crawfish here that are the size of lobsters. I mentioned the turtle diversity. This is a stink pot turtle caught in the Magnolia River, I believe. And then this is a tragedy unfolding before our eyes. You are looking right now at a picture of an extinction event happening all around us right now. All the brown leaves you see on the trees and all these bare leaves, this is a red bay. This is one of the main trees in our swamps. 1 out of every 5 trees in an Alabama or a Gulf Coast swamp is red bay. They are all dying right now because of an invasive Chinese beetle that came in shipping pallets with all the stuff we get shipped around the world. And this beetle is killing all our red bay trees, and there appears to be no hope. So right now we are watching this whole class of trees be wiped out of our swamp. Now, you might wonder why that's important. Well, there are a bunch of reasons, but one of them is because another member of the laurel family, which red bay is in, is the spice bush, which is very common in our swamps. Spice bush is also being killed by this beetle. That means that one of our swallowtail butterflies, the spice bush swallowtail, we have these big swallowtail butterflies everybody loves to see. One of them is now going extinct because the only plant it can lay eggs on, the spice bush, is being wiped out by this beetle. It's staggering. But we do have some bright spots when it comes to endangered species in Alabama. This is the Tulatoma snail. This fish, this snail was on the endangered species list and has actually been upgraded and pulled off the list, because the Marion Shellfish Hatchery up in Marion, Alabama, run by the state, grew a bunch of these snails, released them in the wild, and they managed to get the river conditions changed in the Coosa River to the point where the snails could exist. There are now millions of them, which is fantastic. Now people say, who cares if a snail species goes extinct? Alabama has more species of snails, you know the refrain, than any other state. Well, look at these creatures. Look at how incredibly different these snail species are. And they're just beautiful. They're wildly colorful. I mean, they're crazy looking. Now, so who cares if a snail dies? The best example I can give you of why you care and I care is to look at a coastal marsh. If you look at marsh grass, you will see this little snail called a marsh periwinkle. On almost every clump of grass, there's a periwinkle, and it's moving up and down. And what it's doing is eating algae off the blades of marsh grass. If you remove marsh periwinkle snails from the marsh dies. And it dies because the algae grows up along the blades of marsh grass and prevents the marsh grass from photosynthesizing. It can't make energy because the sunlight is being absorbed by all the algae. So something as inconsequential as a little snail that's the size of a nickel taken out of the marsh means you lose the entire marsh. Now, I mentioned our mussels. This is one of our mussel species. That's a big bucket behind it. These mussels are gigantic. They are as big as a lunch tray at McDonald's. They're 150 years old. Alabama, we have mussel shoals. Alabama was famous for its mussels for a long, long time. The mussels were so thick on our rivers that we started trying to modify the rivers. You see the date on here is 1882, when they built a lock around Mussel Shoals to get past the mussels. There has been a destruction of mussels in Alabama that you cannot imagine. I mean, billions of creatures have died because of all the lakes we built, all the big reservoirs. Out of the 150 some species of mussels in Alabama, only 11 can live in lakes. When you read accounts of Alabama rivers from the 1800s, they talk about being able to see the bottom in 10 and 20 feet of water because they were so clear. Well, they were so clear because there were billions of mussels that are gone now. Every mussel, just like an oyster, can filter 50 gallons of water a day. Our rivers were spectacularly clear with these bottoms where you would ride over and the bottom would be orange or purple with the colors of the mussel shells, but it was all about the dams. Nobody's going to take the lakes out of Alabama. They're huge financial ecosystems built up around them, tourism, fishing, lake houses, and all that. But we need to understand the ecological toll because there are things we can do. Now, this picture is from, I think, Lay Dam. It's one of the first ones. The 7 dams built on the Coosa River. This is Clear Creek Falls, which has been buried under the lake in Smith Lake. The 7 dams built on the Coosa River caused more than 40 species to go extinct. That is the single largest cause of extinctions of any factor in the history of the United States. We can see it now with our sturgeon. This is a Gulf sturgeon that was coming up the river. These giant creatures used to run up our rivers. This one was caught in Centerville, Alabama. It was 348 pounds, the largest freshwater fish ever caught. But now they run into these dams. This is a paddlefish. This is the first one I ever saw. You see its nose rubbed raw from butting against the dam trying to get past it. This paddlefish had its whole nose broken off. And then this is a picture of the aftermath of a jubilee down on Mobile Bay. These are flounder that have been spiked. We all hear about jubilees as this great thing. Daphne calls itself the Jubilee City because all these sea creatures come up to the water's edge and you can just scoop them up. Well, that's a warning cry. It's telling you that the bay doesn't have enough oxygen to support life. Mobile Bay now and Wolf Bay, all of Alabama's little coastal bays now have dead zones in them in the summertime, just like the big dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's all the pollutants coming down the rivers. What you see here is a speckled trout caught in 2009. At that time, every fish species in Mobile Bay, redfish, mullet, sheephead, flounder, speckled trout, white trout, you name it, all had lesions all over them. It was in the winter. Nobody could figure out why. The state put out an order not to eat fish out of Mobile Bay. When Auburn scientists finished their analysis of the water chemistry and everything, what they figured out was we had such a wet winter. It washed so many pesticides into the bay from the farm fields where they'd just been applied for the spring planting, that the pesticides in the water destroyed the slime coating on the fish and made them vulnerable to these infections. I mean, that's a staggering thing. We poisoned and sickened all the fish in Mobile Bay with pesticides flowing off our land. This is a picture of Dog River. This used to happen every time it rained because the city of Mobile wouldn't put litter traps in to catch all the litter flowing off the roads and the interstates. This got so bad that people would fish mats of trash floating into Mobile Bay out of Dog River because fish would gang up under the trash. Getting back to what the situation in Alabama, when I was working at the paper and I was writing about this and putting it on the front page every time it happened, the mayor of Mobile came to the newspaper and he sought me out and he said, "You're embarrassing the city every time you do this." And I said, "Yes, I'm going to keep doing it every time it rains until you fix it." He wasn't mad that this garbage was flowing into our river. He was mad that I was telling everyone about it. And that for so long has been the problem in Alabama. Now this is Mobile Bay seen from Skylab in the 70s. And what you're seeing here is a massive amount of mud flowing into the bay. If you look in the center of the picture, you see a particularly bright plume coming out of the Lake Forest subdivision as it was created. It's the biggest subdivision in the world. The creation of that subdivision, the mud coming out of it, flowing down the bay, destroyed all the grass beds on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay in one fell swoop. You talk to people before the creation of the Lake Forest subdivision, there was grass all the way down the eastern shore of the bay. It all got smothered under a layer of mud and it's never come back. Mud is probably the most destructive thing we do in our habitats. You see here, it's filling the Escotapa River coming from an Alabama Department of Transportation construction site. This is mud being eaten out of this canyon on Joe's Branch in Baldwin County because a new car lot was built, and all the rain off of this 17 acres of pavement came through the storm sewers and flooded into this river, into this tiny little creek that's 2 feet wide, and ate it, just ate the banks, dropped the creek 10 feet down below the forest floor. This creek ought to be 6 inches below where the trees are up there. But all that mud went straight into Mobile Bay. This is what an Alabama stream ought to look like. This is the stream where I mentioned I caught those 6 beautiful little species of fish. And this is 3 Mile Creek in Mobile. You know, I know which one I prefer. This is Fish River, and that's how I would like to see all our rivers stay. But we have a lot of work to do. Alabama has the worst environmental laws in the nation. The Alabama Department of Environmental Management is the least funded environmental agency at the state level in the nation and has been for decades. You know, these are inescapable facts. We are the leaders in extinction because we don't fund our environmental agency. The only way these things are going to change are if people gather together and change them, which is what the book is all about. I am trying to arm the public with the information they need to care about this place and take action and do something. Now, here are a few pages of the book, just so you can see what it looks like. The whole book is full color. This is the beginning of the bog section. This is part of the bay section. This is part of the section about the Delta. And so that's what the book looks like. It's full color, it's beautiful. If you'd like to get a copy, you can get them from Amazon. You can get them from the Alabama Booksmith in Birmingham. You can get them at Page and Palette. I think Redbeard's Outfitters in Mobile, Books A Million has them. You can, or you can order them from me. Here's my email. You can find me on Facebook and I can get you a signed copy. And that is, let's see what I got. If I can. So that's what I got. Anybody wants to ask questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat window, but that was amazing and a wonderful presentation and just amazing photos. It was beautiful. Thank you so much for doing the presentation for us. That was one of my personal favorite ones of all time, and I think everybody else enjoyed it. Well, wait, maybe I do have some questions. Oh, I do have a question. Okay. Brian on Facebook asked if littering in industry, for example, port chemical plants are threats.
Yes, chemical threats pose a unique threat, and it, you know, it is usually specific to a small area. But if you look on the Mobile River, we have a Ciba-Geigy plant and an Olin plant that have rendered that section of swamp around them near McIntosh, Alabama, as one of the most polluted spots in the United States. The mercury levels and DDT levels there are unparalleled anywhere. The state caught the largemouth bass there with 11 parts per million mercury in its body, which is the highest total ever recorded in a living creature. The state of Alabama has for decades fought forcing the cleanup of the swamps associated with those Superfund sites. So what is the legacy of that pollution? We see it all over. Mobile Bay's oysters rank the highest. The last time the federal government did testing in the early 2000s, ranked the highest of any oysters found in the country for mercury and DDT. When we look at the eggshells of the pelicans on Gaillard Island, which is a wild success story, it helped bring pelicans back from extinction. There are now 20-some thousand pairs out there, but their eggshells are still just below the threshold for pollution, for egg failure from DDT. And that we haven't made DDT here since 1972, but it's still flowing out of those swamps. So, you know, that is a huge problem. The biggest threat facing the Delta outside of mud, which smothers everything that I mentioned, is the coal ash at the Berry Steam plant. And that is a huge threat. It's almost unimaginable. The big spill in Tennessee was a tiny fraction of the amount of coal ash that is at Berry. I think Berry is 22 million tons, maybe, if I'm remembering right, and that spill was about 3 million tons. So the most important thing we could do is get Alabama Power to dig up the coal ash and move it elsewhere, because if that dam were to break, it would flood across the entire delta. According to their predictions, their modeling shows it would smother the entire delta, which would in turn kill Mobile Bay. I mean, it would be a staggering environmental catastrophe, the likes of which the nation has never experienced, truly.
I've got a question that relates to that. People are asking, what kind of actions do you suggest we take to change the state and get Alabama Power to take action on the coal ash pit?
Well, you know, Frederick Douglass said, power never gave up anything without a demand, and that is always the truth. When I look at Alabama, Alabama's always been about 20 years behind the rest of the country in terms of environmental stuff. For instance, the city of Mobile still does not do citywide curbside recycling. It's the largest city in America I can find that doesn't do curbside recycling. So it's all about, you know, joining the environmental groups that exist here. When I arrived here in '99, Mobile Baykeeper had 1 employee and was brand new. The Coastal Foundation, the Alabama Coastal Foundation, had 1 employee. I think the Weeks Bay Foundation had 1 employee. Well, Baykeeper now has about 15. The Coastal Foundation has 9 or 10. That means these groups have grown massively. They can now support staff. That's where they start to get a critical mass where they can do, they can protest, they can create reports, they can do things that are important. And this is really important now with our newspapers disintegrating. You know, when I worked at the Press Register in 2012, we had 94 people in the newsroom. Now they have 3 reporters covering Mobile. So there's no way the environment is going to get the kind of coverage it deserves or used to get. So that's where these groups need to come in, and you need to join the groups and have your voice heard and be part of their efforts, because that is the only force that is going to go up against the business interests and polluters in Alabama.
I have another question from an assistant professor of journalism at University of South Alabama, and it's a 2-part question. Many of my students are interested in environmental issues, and our emphasis is to understand global issues in a local context. Number 1, we require our journalism students to take a minor. What subject would most help an aspiring environmental reporter?
This is a great question, especially because I was not a journalism student ever, despite having a long career in journalism. I was a film major. And I learned, you know, I went to film school in New York City and learned all kinds of skills there that have come to be incredibly important to my journalism work. I think as important to anything else is being well-rounded. And so the more you know about anything you could get involved with, the better. I would say that anybody wanting to do environmental journalism should have a good understanding of biology and chemistry. And then I would say, if you want to help document what's going on around you, you need to be expert with the tools of documenting what's going on around you, which is, you know, cameras. I mean, cell phone is a massive thing for a journalist. You can make an entire documentary with a cell phone and a laptop these days. But you need to have good computer skills, you need to have good camera skills, and you need to be a strong writer and spoken communicator. And these are all things you could work on in college. They're all things you can work on alone in your bedroom. But, you know, communication is all about distilling a situation down and being able to share it with people. And you have to be able to kind of cut the extraneous noise out of an argument and get right to the heart of it. And I will tell you, you know, with journalism jobs, one of the reasons I would get job offers was because I could take pictures. You know, I could do a handy job with a camera, and I could write, and I could cut video. So those things I would say are critical to anybody who wants to be a journalist or wants to help shine a light on something in their neighborhood that's bad.
The second part of the question is, what kinds of stories should journalism students be following in order to raise awareness and arm citizens with information?
Just about everything. You know, a journalist needs to be kind of a voracious magpie of information. I am no longer a journalist in a daily sense, but my wife constantly chastises me for how much time I spend reading news. And it's an itch I can't really scratch enough. But the more you understand where you are in a kind of holistic sense, the political workings, the industrial workings, the environmental workings, the more you see those critical places where they come together. Environmental journalism is always about money and power and pollution versus the environment, which is the defenseless thing that can't speak for itself. It depends entirely on us. And so when the environment is threatened by money, power, and that nexus, the only thing standing between the environment and destruction are the environmental groups and the activists and the journalists who step in there. And so you have to know what's going on to understand whether it's important or not. So they need to read everything.
Okay, we have lots of questions. Michael on Facebook asks, what is the criteria for an expected extinction?
Well, they're looking at population trends. They're trying to find creatures or plants in places they used to be and aren't any longer. Usually very, very demonstrable. They see population trends going down. And so they can say, okay, if this continues unabated, which means we don't do anything to change anything, we're gonna wipe out the last of these creatures. So I think it's pretty straightforward. Fish and Wildlife has all kinds of methods to do that stuff and that monitoring and things. But I mean, it's not hard to look at a lot of creatures and say they're disappearing fast. I don't see them anymore. And that's happening with our songbirds even now.
Okay, we have another question. Have any of the invasive Asian carp species plaguing the Midwest been found in rivers flowing into Mobile Bay?
No, they have not, to my knowledge. We do occasionally have some invasive species show up, particularly like African, like the tilapia and stuff like that. But we do not have problems with the jumping carp, the mirrored carp and all those yet. I don't know how we've gotten so lucky. I'm glad we don't have those problems. We have a persistent problem with a big snail, the Amazonian apple snail, which is about the size of a baseball. And they are in Langen Park in Mobile on the edge of the Delta. And they have proven impossible to eradicate so far. They've been there now a good decade with all kinds of efforts to kill them every year. So, when something like that gets loose, it's hard to ever get rid of it, as they're seeing in Missouri and those places with the carp, as we see with kudzu, et cetera. But no, we don't have them yet, nor do we have zebra mussels.
We have a question from Wendy on Facebook. She says there was talk of making the Delta a national park. Do you have any word on that?
Well, I think that effort is dead for the time being. I think it was handled poorly politically by the people who really wanted it to happen. I think they approached it in a poor way, and it became a political football between the Tea Party movement and the traditional Republican candidates. And it was all about, don't let the feds take over the Delta. It was actually a moronic argument because the feds already own almost all of the Delta. People don't seem to understand, but the whole lower half of the Delta, everything you see down there is owned by the federal government. The Corps of Engineers owns it. They lease it to the state of Alabama. But the larger question about the national park is, would it help? Making the Delta a national park doesn't solve any of the environmental problems. It doesn't clean up the pollution on the edges. It doesn't stop the destruction of the wetlands around the Delta. And it doesn't stop the mud from flowing into the Delta. One of the things I didn't talk about, one of the biggest threats in the Delta is mud, just plain old mud flowing in, smothering the bottoms, killing creatures that live on the bottom. Same thing in Mobile Bay. Well, one of the reasons we have so much mud is because we have so much logging. Alabama is number 3 in the country for timber. When you look at number 1, Oregon, they have a law that you're not allowed to cut trees within 25 feet of the high water mark of any stream. We don't have a law like that. Alabama has a recommendation. Alabama typically tries to avoid laws and for the environment and have recommendations. Alabama recommends you do not cut more than half of the trees growing right up to the edge of the stream. But there is no law preventing you from cutting down every single one of those trees. Well, what do the trees do along that river? They do a couple of things. One, they constantly drop debris into the water, sticks, stumps that make snags where fish can hide behind, etc. But they also provide a woody buffer along the edge of the stream, which stops mud flowing downhill from getting into the stream. It hits all the leaves and stuff, and it stops. And the trees growing along the edge provide shade for the water. Without shade, the creeks become just these superheated pools of algae. The sun, too much sun lets the algae grow, sucks up all the oxygen, and they become dead zones. So the single biggest thing we could probably do if we could get people to unite behind one cause would be a buffer zone along our streams and rivers.
Wonderful. Jan on Facebook asks, as citizens, how do we best advocate for better funding of Alabama environmental agencies?
Well, that is Alabama's perpetually broke because we just are. So we have to prioritize. The ADEM used to have more funding. It has been zero funded for perhaps the last decade by the legislature. It gets all its money now from the permit fees it charges to industry. That was by design. The state wanted to handicap it so that they couldn't inspect industries very often. They had to sell their airplane they use for aerial surveillance, et cetera. And the EPA almost took away Alabama's right to monitor its own environment, which would have been unprecedented for any state, because the states are charged with enforcing the Federal Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. Alabama has stripped its environmental agency down so low, it almost can't accomplish that task in a legal sense. But again, it's about voting. It's about prioritizing. It's about these environmental groups. Until politicians in Alabama are being forced to care about the environment, they won't. That's just that's just how it works. So it's all about the people, protesting.
We have a question about the Eastern Shore. What, if anything, are the mayors of Mobile and the Eastern Shore doing to prevent dumping sewage into Mobile Bay?
I don't know that the mayors are doing much of anything. Our sewage situation is a lot better than it was. We're in a very rainy place. We definitely need more sewer capacity. I think the sewage spills that happen in a big rain event, like a hurricane or something like that, aren't as big a concern as people think they are. That sewage is cleaned up by Mother Nature within about 24 hours. I think a much bigger problem and a continual problem we need to address are the septic tanks along all our coastal rivers and along the beaches. Those things are leaking sewage into the ecosystem constantly by design. And we have them in floodplains all over. Go down Fish River, Dog River, whatever. All those places need to be on city sewer. And that's what we should be doing with the BP money. One of the best things I think we could do with the BP money would be grants to put all of the coastal river communities on city sewer to get the septic out of the thing. It would cost a lot of money, but we still have billions sitting around, hundreds of millions waiting to be spent. The coastal mayors should all get together and get rid of the septic tanks in the floodplains of all of our rivers and our wetland areas.
And we have people thanking you for showing us the beauty and grandeur of Alabama and pointing out its troubles. There's also one last question. Somebody would like your email once again and to know how we can obtain a copy of your book.
All right. The email is rainsorama@gmail.com, and that's RAINESORAMA@gmail.com. You can also message me through Facebook. I'm on there as Ben Rains. And you can get a book directly from me. You can come pick it up at my house in Fairhope if you want, or I can mail them. I've been mailing them all over to people. I know Page and Palette in Fairhope has the book. I know Books A Million has the book, and they have them online as well. Amazon is currently out, but should have books within a few days to mail out. But if you want to get them straight from me, I'll inscribe them and I can make them to whoever. I'm happy to do that. But it was very frustrating to have the first printing run out. But it's a good thing to have a second printing. But basically
It's a very good thing.
we had basically sold all the first printing before the release date of the book, which, in COVID with all the delays in publishing caused a huge headache. But I love that people are buying the book and enjoying the book. One of the most fulfilling things for me was seeing the Los Angeles Times run almost the entire first chapter in their newspaper. Out in California, they run a whole page of their newspaper about Alabama's wild places. That's just, I love it. I love it.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. That was an awesome presentation, amazing pictures. Everybody loved it. Just wonderful feedback online. Thank you so much for being with us. And at this time, we're going to end the program. And I just want to thank everyone who tuned in today. And everybody just have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for doing this for us.